History tells us the age of discovery was led by brave explorers, chasing the horizon for God and country. But the ledgers? They tell us it was led by the board of directors. If you take Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, and you combine them into one single entity, you still wouldn't reach the valuation of the world's first true superpower. In the 17th century, a single company held a valuation of $7.9 trillion. They had their own army of 30,000 soldiers. They had a navy of 200 warships. They had the legal power to coin their own money, build their own cities, and execute anyone who stood in the way of their profit margins. They were the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC, better known as the Dutch East India Company. Before there was a Wall Street, before there was an oil cartel, there was a monopoly so brutal it treated human life as a rounding error on a balance sheet. This is an audit of the deadliest corporation in history. This is the $7 trillion monopoly. Chapter 1. The Invention of the Shareholder. In 1602, the Dutch Republic had a problem. Their merchants were killing each other in a race to the Spice Islands. Every time a ship returned with pepper or cloves, the market would be flooded, prices would crash, and everyone would lose money. It was a race to the bottom. So, the Dutch government forced a merger. They created a single entity and gave it a 21-year monopoly on all trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. But they did something else, something that changed the world forever. They realized that a voyage to the East Indies was a massive risk. Ships sank, pirates attacked, diseases wiped out crews. To fund these massive risks, the VOC didn't just ask the rich, they asked everyone. They invented the initial public offering. For the first time in history, a maid, a baker, or a blacksmith could walk into a small house in Amsterdam and buy a share of a company. They didn't just invest in a ship, they invested in the corporation. The forensic discovery, unlike other companies that dissolved after every voyage, the VOC kept the capital. It was permanent capital. This meant they could build bigger ships, hire more mercenaries, and outlast any competitor. They didn't just build a trade route, they built a financial engine that never had to stop for air. The pattern interrupt, joining the audit. We are about to dive into the Nutmeg Cartel and how this company committed a corporate genocide just to keep prices high. But before we open that file, if you want to be part of the 1% who see the world through the lens of the Grand Audit, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Most people watch history as a story of heroes. We watch it as a story of incentives. If you're with us, join the audit. Now let's head to Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The Nutmeg Cartel. In the 1600s, nutmeg was the lithium of the world. It was a luxury good that sold for a 6,000% markup in Europe. But there was a catch. Nutmeg only grew in one tiny cluster of islands in Indonesia, the Banda Islands. To the VOC, the people living on those islands weren't trading partners. They were a security risk. The company's Governor General, Jan Pieter Zoon Cohen, decided that free trade was bad for the share price. He demanded that the Bandanese people sell their nutmeg only to the Dutch, at a price fixed by the VOC. When the islanders refused and tried to trade with the English, Cohen didn't send negotiators. He sent 800 Japanese mercenaries. In a few bloody weeks, the VOC killed or deported 90% of the population. Out of 15,000 people, only a few hundred survived. Cohen then repopulated the islands with VOC employees and slaves. They turned the entire island chain into a high-security spice factory. They created the world's first managed supply chain. If they had too much nutmeg, they would literally burn the excess in the streets of Amsterdam to keep the price high. They didn't care about the product. They cared about the margin. Chapter 3. The Corporate State. By 1670, the VOC was no longer just a company. It was a sovereign ghost. They were the largest private employer on the planet. They had 50,000 employees who were more loyal to the company logo than to their own king. They had created their own legal system. If you were a VOC employee and you stole from the warehouse, you weren't tried in a court of law. You were tried in a corporate tribunal. They proved a dangerous theory, that if a corporation gets big enough, it becomes the state. They controlled the ports of Cape Town, the shores of Ceylon, and the gates of Japan. They were the gatekeepers of global trade. If you wanted to move goods between the East and the West, you paid the VOC tax. The audit result, but as any modern CEO knows, a monopoly breeds rot. Because they had no competition, the VOC became bloated. Corruption was rampant. Officers were skimming off the top. They were so focused on protecting their monopoly that they missed the rise of more efficient competitors like the British. They had $7 trillion in value, but their cash flow was dying. Conclusion: the liquidated giant. In 1799, the $7 trillion giant finally collapsed. They were so deep in debt that the Dutch government had to step in and nationalize them. People in Amsterdam used to say VOC stood for Vergen onder corruptie, perished under corruption. The company died, but its DNA's in every stock trade you make today. They invented the corporate bond and the idea that a company's only responsibility is to its shareholders. History remembers the ships. We remember the cost. Beneath the wealth of the Dutch Golden Age lies the record of a calculated massacre. Splendor built on the blood of the spice. If you found this audit valuable, click the subscribe and like buttons. Keep the audit alive, and I'll see you in the next file.